Hello everyone, and welcome to the 101st episode of Analyzing Evil, featuring the Armitage family and the Order of the Coagula from Get Out. A group of rich yuppies, cradling unimaginable power and wealth in their hands, the Order of the Coagula and the families that make up its ranks represent a twisted mixture of eugenics, racism, and racial admiration that sees them committing numerous injustices against an unknown number of individuals in order to both prolong their lives and give them the physical advantages they've always dreamed of having. A pseudo-scientific nightmare manifested by the mad efforts of one family to provide this service to those faithful few willing to partake in their barbarity. In this video, we're going to explore all that we're given in this film about this organization by examining its methods, members, and the small details that are strewn throughout this film. Details which I've partially been helped in identifying through an Easter egg video by Heavy Spoilers, which you can find a link to on your screen now or down in the description. But before we begin, let's first talk about our sponsor for this video, Audible. As some of you may already know, I'm a big fan of Audible. Not only do I use Audible to find and listen to new and exciting titles in my free time, but having access to any book I need to read to cover these characters in spoken word form is incredibly helpful, as you can utilize Audible from anywhere and on virtually any device. Their expansive library is host to an unmatched selection of audiobooks and podcasts from any genre you can think of, and Audible also produces their own original content that you can find in the Audible Plus catalog, which you can access totally free by signing up for their Audible Plus membership package, one that I highly recommend, as not only will you have access to these free choices each month, but you'll also earn a credit each month that you can use towards anything in the Audible library. I've recently started listening to Babel by R.F. Kuang, a historical fantasy story about a man who enters Oxford University's mythical Royal Institution of Translation to learn the secrets of both language and magic, uncovering a sinister plot that's given the British Empire its power that's sure to leave any fan of history and fantasy thoroughly entertained, and I highly recommend that you pick it up with one of your credits. Right now, you can try Audible free for 30 days by going to audible.com/Vile and using the code VILE at checkout, or by texting VILE to 500-500. A great opportunity to check out everything that Audible has to offer. So don't wait. Go to audible.com/Vile and use the code VILE at checkout, or text VILE to 500-500 to start enjoying some old favorites and pick up some new titles for your library. Thank you, Audible, for sponsoring this video. Now, without further ado, let's begin. The Armitage family, for perhaps centuries, has belonged to the Coagula Order, an order of affluent families that have likely abused their positions of power since the beginning of their existence. In what way that was, we'll never know, but I think it would be safe to say that they've likely been searching for a way to achieve immortality for quite some time. And in the late 80s or early 90s, the order finally achieved just that through the Armitage family. Through the combined talents of Dean, a neurosurgeon, and Missy, a psychiatrist and hypnotist, the Armitage family pioneered the Coagula method, which is the subjugation of a person's consciousness through hypnosis, a victim who is then used as a vehicle for the consciousness of another through brain surgery. Now, because Roman Armitage, the family's patriarch, was once an Olympic sprinter who was beat by Jesse Owens during the qualifying round at the 1936 Olympics in Berlin, the Coagula method would be used to specifically target black people for their genetic advantages. When we consider the date of the video that Chris watches during his preparation, we can assume that the Armitage family have been abducting people long before Rose and Jeremy came of age, perhaps using the same methods, albeit with Missy and Dean filling their roles respectively. And we can also assume that Roman and his wife Marianne wanted to ensure that their family's business was set up properly and that the technique was perfected before they took the plunge themselves, as they only transferred their consciousness many years after the family began their process, when Rose was luring in victims romantically. Something interesting to note is that Chris seems to be a man with little to no family, and though we don't have too much info on the other unfortunate victims of the Order of the Coagula, it stands to reason that in order to keep engaging in this horrid business, that the Armitage family and company would likely target others without much family, another sinister component of their family's business that adds another layer of heartbreak to their horrid actions. Another way in which the lack of family likely helps the Order accomplish their goals is the higher chance of a person having experienced traumatic events in their life that are associated with the loss or lack of familial relationships, as the way in which Missy initially ensnares Chris into her psychological prison is by forcing him to relive the repressed trauma he has regarding his inaction when his mother was hit by a car. And with that in mind, if the other victims were in similar situations regarding regarding their families, there was likely a plethora of trauma available within them for Missy to work with, like tragic scenarios similar to the one Chris experienced, or through underlying abandonment issues developed by the loss of parents in one way or another. Now, at the time of Chris's sojourn into the world of the Armitage family, what is there to say about the 4 core members of the family? Starting with the family's secondary patriarch, we have a man who embodies the predominant type of racism that can be found in this film. The tentative progressive mask displayed by people who are trying their best to not seem racist, with phrases like, "My best friend is black," or in Dean's case, his attempts at connecting with Chris through his use of lingo, his speech about connecting with another person's culture, and his reassurance that if he could have, he would have voted for Obama a 3rd time. Laid back and amiable, Dean, while intense at times, just like the rest of the family, presents himself as a well-intentioned but misguided everyman whose facade is underscored by subtle hints of true racism. His wife, on the other hand, seems to be much more grounded and down-to-earth than her husband, frequently aware of his missteps in regard to veiled reassuring racism, and she, while still a seemingly pleasant person, is much more reserved than her husband is. The quiet force of reason and true power behind the family, as we see often when she's the one keeping everyone in check or giving the rest of them commands. Jeremy, on the other hand, while appearing to be just as laid back as his parents, approaches his amiability in a much different way, giving off the impression of the skeevy frat boy D-bag with no filter. Jeremy, whether because he was taught to be this way by his family or because it's in his nature, is much more abrasive and forceful than the rest of his family members, which is evident in the way he captures his victims, but also in his speech patterns and mannerisms, the best example being his conversation with Chris during dinner about MMA. Taking after her mother, Rose appears to be the most sane out of the 4, displaying the same conscientious attitude towards her father and brother's blunders, as well as appearing to be the most level-headed and well-adjusted member of the family next to her mother. And on the surface, she's about as remarkable as any other white woman her age. However, these surface-level personalities, while still being largely intact once the masks are dropped, hide the sinister truths of the hidden aspects of their characters. Dean and Missy are essentially the same, with the caveat that they are unnaturally comfortable with their family's business, showing that they have a complete lack of empathy for the people that they use in their work, while still retaining their cheery personalities. Much like their parents, Jeremy and Rose are desensitized to their barbaric family business. But whereas we never really get to see too much sadism from the Armitage parents, we are treated to it in abundance within Jeremy, and we're even treated to a bit of conquest-based sadism with Rose towards the end of the film, when we see her trolling for more victims on her computer in a pristine white jumpsuit, with pictures of her previous catches now hanging on the wall behind her as macabre trophies to her successes in seducing men and women into becoming guinea pigs for the Coagula method. It's not just the Armitage family, though, that participate in this type of deplorable behavior, but the wider Coagula order as a whole. During the Armitage family's annual party, we're treated to a whole host of characters who display the same type of covert racism as Dean, like the Greens, who inquire about Chris's sportsmanship in the golfing world, much like Jeremy does when he presses Chris about his MMA proficiency. And the Greens pepper in their admiration of Tiger Woods as reassurance that they definitely aren't racist. Then there's Nelson and Lisa, who are in the market for a new host to, of course, extend the life of Nelson, but to also give Lisa a new toy to play with, commenting on Chris's looks and physique in her not-so-covert desire to have Chris essentially become her new husband. The last couple we're exposed to who interact with Chris in this way are the Drays. People who seem to be concerned with what's hip and in, making the strange connection that black is now in fashion and that they desire to be amongst the fashionable once again and be rid of their failing pasty bodies. The only one aside from Rose and Missy who doesn't engage in the same type of racism as the rest of the order is Hudson, who isn't as concerned with the color of a person's skin so much as their specific qualities, like Chris's eye for photography, which isn't a racial advantage that any race can claim to have. How these people act is obviously reprehensible, and the Coagula method is beyond brutal and heartless. But perhaps one of the most diabolical and sickening things we're presented with in this film is the way in which the Order of the Coagula determines who is going to be the lucky recipient of their latest host body, playing a game of silent bingo, which is actually a silent auction, wherein either the highest bidder, the one most in need of a new body, or the member who desires a specific trait that the victim has, is chosen as the winner. A practice that's made all the more terrible because it harkens back to the slave auctions of old that I'm sure quite a few of these order members' ancestors were involved with in years past. and once they've finished the auction, all the evil hidden away by the order of the Coagula is put on full display as the victim is wrangled in one way or another down to the lab, like the trophy buck hanging above the television in the waiting room. Their psychological pre-op engaged as they spend their last free moments filled with terror at the prospect of what's to come. Fortunately for Chris, he's able to stave off Missy's hypnosis through clever thinking, and he manages to escape the clutches of the Order while giving the Armitage family their due, saving who knows how many people from suffering similar fates as Andre and the other victims of the Order. And at this end, what is there to say about the Armitage family and the Order of the Coagula? They were a conglomerate of powerful families, hell-bent on preserving their own mortality, no matter the cost to others. To quote Dean, "Fire is a reflection of our own mortality. We're born, we breathe, we die. Even the sun will die someday, but we are divine, gods, trapped in cocoons." Seeking to eternally preserve their divinity in a cocoon, the Order of the Coagula pioneered a method to transfer the consciousness of one person into another via brain surgery, hiding the horror that is their barbarity from the world through a thick layer of normalcy that could have fooled the world over if it weren't for the actions of Chris at his most perilous hour. If the Armitage children are any indicator, the world that this diabolical organization created was one that never meant to last regardless, as the rearing of children to be the scions of a system of violence and manipulation would have ensured that the generations that followed were as mentally and emotionally damaged, if not more so, than Jeremy and Rose. Beyond horrifying and deserving of condemnation on every level, the Order of the Coagula is the horrid byproduct of dark ambition, outrageous wealth, and racial envy. Admiration of the genetic advantages gifted to black people turned towards a racist scheme of immortality that brought an end to an unknown number of innocent lives. Though it may be that the Order of the Coagula would eventually collapse, when that collapse would happen is up for debate, as even though the Armitage family met its end at the climax of this film, the other families who make up the Order still remain. Perhaps with Chris's testimony and a good amount of work put into revealing their crimes, the rest of the families would be dealt with in time. However, a group of well-connected wealthy elites is not one that's taken down so easily, and in all likelihood, the Order of the Coagula will persist for years after this event, if not for generations, utilizing the work of the Armitage family to ensure that their lives would continue to be prolonged by the cruel hand of evil. Thank you all for tuning in to this episode of Analyzing Evil, and I hope you've enjoyed. What are your thoughts on the Armitage family and the Order of the Coagula? Did I miss anything? Let me know down below, and leave a suggestion for a villain you'd like to see featured while you're at it. If you liked this video, hit that thumbs up button, and make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. A big thank you to all of my subscribers, my patrons, and anyone who's decided to honor me with a super thank. A most vile thank you to them, as well as our most dedicated patrons. Join the channel's Discord server and Reddit to interact with myself and the community, and follow me on the social media platforms listed below to keep up with the channel. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll be seeing you soon.